Have you ever wondered what it would be like to hear words so powerful they could change the course of history? Imagine standing on a hillside in ancient Galilee, listening to a teacher whose radical ideas would shake the foundations of society for millennia to come. In this video, we'll explore the revolutionary teachings of Jesus that left his disciples awestruck and continue to challenge us today. From "love your enemies" to "the last shall be first," we'll unpack the profound implications of Jesus' most radical statements. How can these ancient words transform your relationships, reshape your worldview, and bring new purpose to your life in our modern, complex world? Whether you're grappling with personal conflicts, seeking meaning in a materialistic society, or yearning for a more just world, this exploration offers timeless wisdom for contemporary challenges. Join us on this journey through time and discover how the revolutionary love Jesus taught can still change hearts, heal divisions, and inspire hope in our troubled times. Are you ready to be challenged, inspired, and perhaps even transformed? Let's dive into the words that shook the world. Picture yourself walking the dusty streets of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. The air is thick with tension and expectation, a palpable energy that seems to crackle with each passing moment. Rome, the mighty empire that dominates the known world, maintains its iron grip on Judea. The Jewish people, proud of their heritage and faith, feel the weight of oppression in every aspect of their lives. But little do they know, a revolution is brewing, not one of swords and spears, but of words and ideas that will shake the very foundations of the ancient world. As we step back in time, let's immerse ourselves in this vibrant, complex world. The Jerusalem of Jesus' time was a city of contrasts. Gleaming marble temples stood alongside humble mud brick homes. The aroma of incense from religious ceremonies mingled with the earthy scents of the marketplace. In the narrow streets, you might brush shoulders with a Roman centurion, his armor glinting in the harsh Mediterranean sun, or a group of animated rabbis deep in discussion about the finer points of the Torah. But to truly understand the impact of Jesus' teachings, we need to delve deeper into the social and political landscape of first-century Judea. Imagine a society where your entire identity is wrapped up in your religious and ethnic heritage. For the Jewish people, their faith wasn't just a part of their lives, it was the very core of their existence. They were the chosen people of God, heirs to the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their history was one of triumph and tragedy, of exile and return, always with the guiding hand of God leading them. Now, picture this proud people living under the thumb of a foreign power. Rome's presence was everywhere, from the imposing fortress Antonia overlooking the temple to the tax collectors demanding their due in the marketplace. The Romans brought roads, aqueducts, and a measure of stability, but at a terrible cost. Jewish customs were often disregarded, their religious sensibilities trampled upon. The memory of past glories, of King David's reign, of Solomon's wisdom, only served to heighten the sense of current indignity. In this pressure cooker of resentment and hope, various factions vied for influence. The Zealots, fierce nationalists, believed that violent resistance was the only way to throw off the Roman yoke. They dreamed of a military messiah who would lead them to victory, much like the Maccabees had done against the Seleucids generations before. Their passionate calls for rebellion resonated with many who chafed under Roman rule. On the other end of the spectrum were the Sadducees, the priestly aristocracy who had found a way to coexist with Roman authority. They focused on maintaining the temple cult and their own positions of power, often at the expense of the common people. Their comfortable arrangements with the Romans made them deeply unpopular with many Jews who saw them as collaborators. Between these extremes were the Pharisees, dedicated to preserving Jewish law and tradition in daily life. They believed that strict adherence to the Torah would hasten the coming of the Messiah. Their influence extended far beyond the temple, into the synagogues and homes of ordinary people. While often portrayed negatively in later Christian writings, many Pharisees were genuinely devoted to helping people live out their faith in a world that seemed increasingly hostile to Jewish values. And what of the common people, the Amharites as they were known? Farmers, craftsmen, fishermen, they were the backbone of society, struggling to make ends meet under the burden of both Roman taxes and religious tithes. For them, the debates of the religious elite often seemed far removed from the realities of daily life. They yearned for a Messiah who would understand their struggles, who would bring not just spiritual salvation but also relief from the grinding poverty and oppression that marked their lives. It's into this complex tapestry of hopes, fears, and competing ideologies that Jesus of Nazareth steps. Imagine the buzz that must have spread as word of this new teacher began to circulate. Here was a man who spoke with authority, yet wasn't part of the religious establishment. He performed miracles, healing the sick and even, some claimed, raising the dead. But it was his teachings that truly set him apart. As Jesus and his growing band of followers made their way through Galilee and Judea, they attracted attention wherever they went. Picture the scenes: crowds gathering in village squares, by lockshores, on hillsides, all straining to hear this carpenter-turned-rabbi. His parables, drawn from everyday life, resonated deeply with the common people. Yet there was something more, something that both fascinated and unsettled those who listened. For Jesus spoke of a kingdom, but not the kind of kingdom most were expecting. In a time when many hoped for a military Messiah to overthrow Rome, Jesus talked of a kingdom not of this world. He preached love for enemies, forgiveness of debts, and a radical reinterpretation of the law. These ideas were revolutionary, challenging the very foundations of how people understood their relationship with God and with each other. The disciples, that ragtag group of fishermen, tax collectors, and zealots, struggled to comprehend the full implications of Jesus' message. They had left everything to follow him, convinced that he was the long-awaited Messiah. But as they traveled with him, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, and spreading the good news of the kingdom, they found their expectations constantly challenged and expanded. As word of Jesus' teaching spread, so did controversy. The religious authorities viewed him with growing alarm. Was he a threat to their carefully maintained balance of power? A blasphemer who claimed divine authority? Or could he be, as some whispered, truly the Messiah? The tension built as Jesus and his followers made their way toward Jerusalem. The holy city was always a hub of activity, but during festival times like Passover, it swelled with pilgrims from all over the Jewish world. The narrow streets buzzed with excitement and speculation. Would Jesus make a grand entrance? Would he finally reveal his true purpose? It's against this backdrop of feverish anticipation that we find Jesus gathering his disciples and a growing crowd of followers on a mountainside overlooking the Sea of Galilee. The sun is beginning to set, casting long shadows across the gathered throng. People have come from far and wide, weathered fishermen from the lakeshore, curious merchants from nearby towns, even a few furtive Pharisees lingering at the edges of the crowd. As Jesus prepares to speak, there's a palpable sense of expectation in the air. Those gathered lean in, hanging on his every word, not realizing they're about to hear something that will challenge everything they thought they knew about power, justice, and the nature of God's kingdom. The stage is set for a teaching that will echo through the centuries, baffling some, inspiring others, and ultimately changing the course of history. But what exactly did Jesus say on that hillside? And why did his words have such a profound and lasting impact? As the golden light of evening bathes the scene, Jesus opens his mouth to speak. The crowd falls silent, waiting with bated breath for the words that are about to transform their understanding of what it means to live in God's kingdom. Little do they know that the teaching they're about to hear will ripple out from this hillside, across continents, and through millennia, challenging and inspiring countless generations to come. As the sun dips lower on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the gathered crowd, Jesus begins to speak. His voice, though not loud, carries across the hillside with a clarity that seems to reach into the very hearts of those listening. The people lean in, their eyes fixed on this enigmatic teacher who has captured their imagination and stirred their hopes. You have heard that it was said, "An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." Jesus begins, his words echoing familiar teachings that have been passed down for generations. The crowd nods in agreement, comfortable with this well-known principle of justice. But then, Jesus continues, and his next words send a shockwave through the assembly. "But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also." A collective gasp ripples through the crowd. Did they hear him correctly? Surely, this must be some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. The disciples exchange bewildered glances, their minds racing to make sense of what they've just heard. This teaching flies in the face of everything they've known, everything they've been taught about justice and standing up for oneself. To fully grasp the revolutionary nature of Jesus' words, we need to dive deeper into the cultural context of the time. In first-century Judea, the concept of honor was paramount. One's standing in society, one's very identity, was intricately tied to the maintenance of personal and family honor. An insult or physical affront wasn't just a personal matter, it was a challenge to one's place in the social order, a threat that demanded a response. The law of an eye for an eye, far from being a call for vengeance, was actually meant to limit retaliation and prevent blood feuds. It established a principle of proportional justice. The punishment should fit the crime, no more and no less. This was considered a fair and balanced approach to maintaining order in society. But Jesus' teaching goes far beyond this. He's not just tweaking the existing system, he's proposing a radical new way of thinking about human relationships and conflict resolution. To understand the full impact of his words, let's break down the scenario he presents. In that culture, a strike on the right cheek would typically be a backhanded slap, an action meant not just to hurt, but to humiliate. It was a gesture used by superiors to put inferiors in their place. By instructing his followers to turn the other cheek, Jesus isn't advocating passive acceptance of abuse. Rather, he's suggesting a way to reclaim one's dignity and challenge the very system that allows such degradation. Imagine the scene: a powerful person delivers a backhanded slap, expecting the recipient to cower in submission. Instead, the person who was struck calmly turns the other cheek. This action would force the aggressor into a dilemma. To strike with the palm of the hand would be to acknowledge the other as an equal, something the aggressor is loath to do. The simple act of turning the other cheek becomes a powerful, non-violent way of asserting one's human dignity and exposing the injustice of the system. As Jesus continues his teaching, the implications of his words begin to sink in. He's not just talking about personal slights or individual conflicts. He's challenging the very foundations of how society operates, how power is wielded, and how justice is understood. You have heard that it was said, "You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy," Jesus continues, once again referencing familiar teachings. The crowd listens intently, wondering what surprising twist will come next. They don't have to wait long. "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." If the first teaching was shocking, this one is downright scandalous. Love your enemies. Pray for your persecutors. In a world where tribal loyalties and national identities were often defined by who one's enemies were, this teaching turns everything upside down. To appreciate the revolutionary nature of this command, we need to consider the political and social realities of the time. The Jewish people were living under Roman occupation, their land controlled by a foreign power that often showed little regard for their customs and beliefs. The memory of past rebellions and their brutal suppression was still fresh. Many harbored deep resentment towards the Romans and those who collaborated with them. Moreover, within Jewish society itself, there were deep divisions. Pharisees and Sadducees, zealots and tax collectors, each group viewing the others with suspicion or outright hostility. The idea of loving one's enemies wasn't just challenging, it seemed downright impossible, even dangerous. Yet here was Jesus, calmly proposing a way of life that transcended these deeply ingrained animosities. He wasn't suggesting a weak-willed capitulation to oppression, but rather a powerful, transformative approach to breaking cycles of violence and hatred. As the teaching continues, Jesus elaborates on this radical concept. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? With these words, Jesus challenges his listeners to expand their understanding of love and community beyond the comfortable boundaries of family, tribe, or nation. He's pushing them to see the humanity in those they've been taught to despise or fear. The implications of this teaching are staggering. If implemented, it would revolutionize not just personal relationships, but entire societies. Wars would become impossible if people truly loved their enemies. Systems of oppression would crumble if those in power saw the humanity in those they sought to dominate. As the crowd wrestles with these ideas, murmurs of discussion break out. Some are nodding thoughtfully, seeing the wisdom in Jesus' words. Others look skeptical, perhaps even angry. How can they be expected to love those who have hurt them, who continue to oppress them? Jesus, sensing their turmoil, doesn't back down. Instead, he pushes even further, delivering a statement that will echo through the centuries. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. At first glance, this seems like an impossible standard. How can any human be perfect? But as we delve deeper into Jesus' meaning, we see that he's not talking about flawless moral behavior. The Greek word used here, teleos, is better translated as complete or mature. Jesus is calling his followers to a completeness of love that reflects the very nature of God. This teaching represents a fundamental shift in how people understood their relationship with God and with each other. In many religious traditions of the time, the gods were seen as distant, capricious beings to be appeased through sacrifice and ritual. But Jesus is presenting a God who is intimately concerned with human affairs, whose very nature is love, and who invites humanity to participate in that love. As the teaching continues, Jesus touches on practical matters that hit close to home for many in the crowd. He speaks about giving to the needy, but with a twist that challenges conventional wisdom. When you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. This instruction flies in the face of a culture where public displays of piety and generosity were common and often expected. Jesus is advocating for a sincerity of heart that goes beyond social expectations or the desire for recognition. He applies the same principle to prayer, warning against showy public displays meant to impress others. Instead, he encourages a private, intimate communion with God. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. As Jesus continues to teach, he touches on topics that resonate deeply with his audience: worry about daily needs, judgment of others, the narrow path of true discipleship. With each new subject, he challenges conventional wisdom and pushes his listeners to think in new ways. One of the most striking moments comes when Jesus addresses the topic of treasures. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. In a world where wealth and possessions were seen as signs of divine favor, this teaching is revolutionary. Jesus is proposing a radical reorientation of values, suggesting that true wealth lies not in material possessions but in spiritual riches. As the teaching draws to a close, Jesus delivers a series of teachings that will become some of the most famous and influential in human history. He speaks of the narrow gate, of false prophets, of building one's house on rock rather than sand. Each metaphor, each parable, is designed to drive home the central message of his teaching, the call to a new way of living, a new understanding of what it means to be in right relationship with God and with one another. The sun has now set, and the first stars are appearing in the darkening sky. The crowd sits in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what they've heard. The disciples, who thought they knew their teacher so well, find themselves grappling with ideas that will take a lifetime to fully understand. As the people begin to stir, preparing to make their way back to their homes and villages, there's a palpable sense that something momentous has occurred. They came expecting to hear a teacher, perhaps even a prophet. What they encountered was something far more, a vision of a world turned upside down, where the first are last and the last are first, where enemies are loved and true treasures are stored in heaven. Little do they know that the words spoken on this hillside will continue to challenge and inspire people for millennia to come. The Sermon on the Mount, as it will come to be known, is more than just a collection of moral teachings. It's a revolutionary manifesto, a call to a new way of being human. As the crowd disperses, conversations buzz with excitement, confusion, and wonder. Some are eager to put these teachings into practice, while others wrestle with doubts and questions. But one thing is certain, no one who heard Jesus speak on that hillside will ever be the same again. The impact of Jesus' words is just beginning to ripple outward. In the days, weeks, and years to come, those who were present will share what they heard with others. The teachings will be discussed in marketplaces, debated in synagogues, whispered in the shadows of Roman fortresses. They will comfort the oppressed, challenge the powerful, and offer hope to those who have lost all hope. But the full implications of Jesus' teachings are yet to be realized. As his ministry continues, he will expand on these ideas, embodying them in his actions and challenging his followers to do the same. The path ahead is fraught with danger and opposition, but also with the promise of transformation, not just for individuals, but for the entire world. As we leave the hillside and follow Jesus and his disciples on their journey, we can't help but wonder, how will these radical teachings play out in the real world? What challenges and opposition will they face? And how will the lives of those who embrace this new way of living be transformed? As the echoes of Jesus' words continue to resonate through the hearts and minds of those who heard him on the hillside, we find ourselves drawn deeper into the mystery of his teachings. The initial shock of his radical statements begins to give way to a hunger for understanding. What did he really mean by these challenging words? How can we possibly live up to such seemingly impossible standards? Let's journey together through the landscape of first-century Judea, exploring the rich tapestry of meaning woven into Jesus' teachings. As we do, we'll uncover layers of significance that his original audience might have missed, and discover how these ancient words continue to challenge and inspire us today. Our first stop takes us to a bustling marketplace in Capernaum, a town that Jesus had made his home base. Here, amid the clamor of traders hawking their wares and the bleating of sacrificial lambs, we overhear a heated discussion between a group of local fishermen and a visiting Pharisee. Turn the other cheek. Love your enemies. This Jesus of yours is going to get us all killed, the Pharisee exclaims, his face flushed with indignation. Does he not understand the world we live in? The Romans would see this as weakness and crush us even further. One of the fishermen, a weathered man named Nathaniel, responds with a thoughtful expression. I've been thinking about this since I heard him speak, he says, his voice calm but intense. I don't think Jesus is asking us to be doormats. There's something powerful about what he's suggesting. It's like he's showing us a way to stand up to injustice without becoming unjust ourselves. This exchange captures a crucial aspect of Jesus' teaching that is often misunderstood. The command to turn the other cheek isn't a call to passive acceptance of abuse or injustice. Rather, it's a strategy for maintaining one's dignity and exposing the injustice of the oppressor. To understand this, we need to delve into the cultural context of the time. In that society, a backhanded slap to the right cheek wasn't just a physical attack, it was a way for a superior to put an inferior in their place. By turning the other cheek, the person struck would be forcing their aggressor into a dilemma. To strike the left cheek, they'd have to use an open-handed slap or a fist, which would mean treating the person as an equal, something they're unlikely to do. This nonviolent resistance strategy doesn't just apply to personal interactions. As we continue our journey, we come across a group of farmers discussing Jesus' teachings in the context of their struggles against Roman taxation. Remember what he said about going the second mile, one farmer says, his eyes gleaming with a newfound understanding. I always thought it was just about being extra helpful. But think about it, Roman law allows soldiers to force us to carry their packs for 1 mile, no more. If we voluntarily go a second mile, we're not just being nice, we're putting them in a difficult position. They could get in trouble with their superiors. This insight reveals another layer of Jesus' teaching. The command to go the second mile isn't just about being generous, it's a way of asserting one's humanity and dignity in the face of oppression. By voluntarily doing more than required, the oppressed person takes control of the situation, transforming themselves from a victim into someone making a free choice. As we continue our exploration, we find ourselves in a small synagogue where a group of scribes are poring over scrolls, trying to reconcile Jesus' teachings with their understanding of the law. "Love your enemies," one scribe mutters, shaking his head in bewilderment. How can this be reconciled with the Psalms that call for God's judgment on the wicked? An older scribe, his beard streaked with gray, looks up from his scroll. Perhaps, he says slowly, Jesus is not negating the law, but fulfilling it in a way we hadn't considered. Remember the words of the prophet Ezekiel, "I will remove the heart of stone from their flesh and give them a heart of flesh." What if this love for enemies is the ultimate expression of that new heart? This discussion touches on a profound truth about Jesus' teaching. He's not simply giving a new set of rules to follow. He's calling for a fundamental transformation of the human heart. The love he speaks of isn't a feeling, but a choice, a decision to see the humanity in even those who oppose us, and to act for their good. As we ponder this, we overhear a conversation between two women drawing water from a well. They're discussing Jesus' teaching on prayer and fasting. "I always felt awkward about those long prayers in the synagogue," one woman confides. It's a relief to hear Jesus say it's okay to pray simply and privately. Her friend nods in agreement. And what he said about fasting, "Anoint your head and wash your face," it's like he's telling us to find joy in our devotion, not to make a show of our piety. This exchange highlights another key aspect of Jesus' teaching, the emphasis on sincerity and inner transformation over outward displays of religiosity. He's not abolishing traditional practices, but reorienting them towards a deeper, more personal relationship with God. As the day wears on, we find ourselves on the outskirts of town, where a group of day laborers are sharing a simple meal and discussing Jesus' words about worry and trust in God. "Look at the birds of the air," one man says, gesturing to a flock of sparrows pecking at the ground nearby. Jesus said God cares for them. How much more must he care for us? Another worker, his face lined with years of hard labor, speaks up. "It's not that we shouldn't work or plan for the future," he says thoughtfully. But Jesus is telling us not to let worry consume us. To trust that God will provide what we need. This conversation touches on one of the most comforting aspects of Jesus' teaching, the assurance of God's care and provision. But it's not a call to irresponsibility or laziness. Rather, it's an invitation to find freedom from the anxiety that often plagues our lives, to live with a sense of trust and purpose. As the sun begins to set, we make our way back into town, where we encounter a group of young people excitedly discussing Jesus' teachings on treasure in the kingdom of God. "Store up for yourselves treasures in heaven," one young man quotes, his eyes shining. "I always thought being religious meant giving up everything good in life. But Jesus is talking about a different kind of wealth, isn't he?" A young woman nods enthusiastically. "It's like he's inviting us into a whole new way of seeing the world. The kingdom of God isn't just something we wait for after we die, it's something we can be part of right now, by living the way Jesus teaches." This insight captures a crucial aspect of Jesus' message, the present reality of God's kingdom. He's not just promising a future reward, but inviting his followers into a new way of living in the here and now. As night falls, we find ourselves back on the hillside where Jesus first delivered these teachings. A small group of his closest disciples are gathered, still wrestling with the implications of what they've heard. Peter, always quick to speak, voices what many are thinking. "Master, these teachings, they're beautiful, but how can we possibly live up to them? Love our enemies. Be perfect as God is perfect. It seems impossible." Jesus looks at his disciples with compassion, understanding their struggle. His response is both challenging and reassuring. "With man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Remember, I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it." These teachings are not a burden, but an invitation to live in the reality of God's kingdom, to experience the transforming power of his love. He pauses, letting his words sink in, then continues. "You see, the heart of all these teachings is love, love for God and love for one another. When you truly grasp how much God loves you, when you allow that love to fill you and flow through you, you'll find that what seems impossible becomes possible. You'll discover a strength and a joy you never knew you had." As the disciples ponder these words, we're reminded of the profound nature of Jesus' teaching. He's not just giving a new set of rules to follow, but inviting his followers into a new way of being. It's a call to live from a place of love and trust in God, rather than fear and self-interest. This understanding begins to shed light on some of the more challenging aspects of Jesus' teaching. The command to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, for instance, takes on new meaning. It's not about achieving flawless moral behavior, but about growing into the fullness of love that reflects God's nature. Similarly, the teachings on nonviolence and love for enemies are not calls to passivity in the face of injustice, but invitations to a revolutionary way of confronting evil. By refusing to mirror the violence of the oppressor, by choosing to see the humanity even in those who oppose us, we open up the possibility for genuine transformation. As we continue to reflect on these teachings, we begin to see how they all interconnect, forming a cohesive vision of life in God's kingdom. The teachings on prayer and fasting, for instance, are not isolated spiritual practices, but part of cultivating a heart that's open to God's love and guidance. The warnings against worry and the encouragement to trust in God's provision are not just about material needs, but about fostering a deep sense of security in God's care that frees us to live generously and courageously. Even the challenging teaching about divorce, often misunderstood as a harsh law, takes on new meaning in this context. Jesus is elevating the sanctity of marriage, yes, but he's also protecting the vulnerable, especially women, who in that culture could be devastated by divorce. It's another expression of the love and justice that characterize God's kingdom. As dawn breaks, casting a golden light over the hillside, we're struck by the realization that these teachings, as challenging as they are, offer a vision of human life as it was meant to be. They paint a picture of a world where love triumphs over hate, where forgiveness breaks cycles of violence, where trust in God's goodness frees us from the tyranny of anxiety and greed. But this vision is not just a distant ideal. Through Jesus' teachings and the power of God's Spirit, it's a reality we're invited to step into here and now. Each act of forgiveness, each choice to love an enemy, each moment of trusting in God's provision, is a taste of the kingdom breaking into our world. As we prepare to continue our journey with Jesus and his disciples, we carry with us a deepened understanding of his teachings. We've seen how they challenge the status quo, offering a radical alternative to the ways of the world. We've glimpsed the profound wisdom and love at their core, and begun to understand how they can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities and societies. Yet we also recognize that living out these teachings is a lifelong journey. It's not about achieving perfection, but about continually opening ourselves to God's love and allowing it to shape our actions and attitudes. It's about falling and getting back up, about learning and growing, about small acts of obedience that, over time, cultivate a heart that beats in rhythm with God's own heart. As we move forward, we're filled with a sense of anticipation. How will these teachings play out in the lives of Jesus and his followers? What challenges will they face as they seek to embody this radical way of life? And how will the world respond to this message of love, forgiveness, and trust in God? The sun now fully risen, we set out to follow Jesus and his disciples as they continue their journey. The teachings of the Sermon on the Mount echo in our ears and hearts, challenging us, inspiring us, inviting us into a new way of being. We move forward with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, knowing that the path ahead will not be easy, but trusting that it leads to life in all its fullness. As we continue our journey with Jesus and his disciples, the radical nature of his teachings begins to unfold in ways that challenge not just individual hearts, but the very foundations of society. The revolution of love that Jesus initiated on that hillside is about to send shockwaves through the established order, redefining power, justice, and human relationships in ways that will echo through the centuries. Let's step into the bustling streets of Capernaum, where the impact of Jesus' words is already being felt. We overhear a conversation between two merchants, their faces animated with a mixture of excitement and concern. "Did you hear what happened at the tax collector's house?" one merchant whispers, his eyes darting around to ensure they're not overheard. "That Jesus fellow actually went and had dinner with Matthew and his cronies." His companion's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. The tax collector? But they're collaborators with Rome. How could a rabbi associate with such people? This incident, seemingly small, represents a seismic shift in social norms. In the highly stratified society of first-century Judea, tax collectors were seen as traitors, collaborating with the Roman occupiers to exploit their own people. For a respected teacher to not only interact with them but to share a meal, a deeply significant act of fellowship in that culture, was nothing short of scandalous. But this is precisely the kind of love revolution that Jesus' teachings set in motion. By breaking bread with those considered unclean or beyond the pale of respectable society, Jesus is demonstrating in action what he taught on the hillside, love that extends beyond the boundaries of tribe, class, or nation. As we ponder this, we find ourselves drawn to the outskirts of town, where a crowd has gathered around Jesus. He's telling a story, a parable, as he often does, and the crowd is hanging on every word. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, Jesus begins, when he was attacked by robbers. As the story of the Good Samaritan unfolds, we can see the shock and discomfort on the faces of many listeners. The idea that a Samaritan, a member of a group despised by the Jews, could be the hero of the story, while respected religious leaders pass by on the other side, is deeply challenging to their worldview. But this parable is more than just a moral tale about helping others. It's a radical redefinition of what it means to be a neighbor, to be part of the human family. Jesus is expanding the circle of moral concern far beyond the traditional boundaries of kinship and nationality. As the crowd disperses, we overhear a group of listeners hotly debating the implications of the story. "But if we treat everyone as our neighbor," one man argues, where do we draw the line? How can we protect ourselves and our community? A woman in the group responds thoughtfully, perhaps that's the point. Maybe Jesus is asking us to stop drawing lines altogether. This exchange captures a crucial aspect of the love revolution Jesus is initiating. It's not just about being kind to those we already consider part of our group. It's about fundamentally reimagining human relationships, seeing the image of God in every person, even those we've been taught to fear or despise. As we continue our journey, we find ourselves in a small village where Jesus and his disciples have stopped to rest. A commotion draws our attention. A group of men are dragging a woman towards Jesus, their faces contorted with self-righteous anger. "Teacher," one of them calls out, "this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses commands us to stone such a woman. What do you say?" The tension in the air is palpable. This is more than just a question about the law, it's a trap, designed to put Jesus in an impossible position. If he agrees with the stoning, he contradicts his message of love and forgiveness. If he opposes it, he can be accused of contradicting the law of Moses. Jesus' response is unexpected and profound. He bends down and begins writing in the dust with his finger. When the accusers persist in questioning him, he straightens up and says, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." One by one, the accusers drop their stones and walk away, until only Jesus and the woman remain. His words to her are both compassionate and challenging, "Neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." This incident illustrates another key aspect of the love revolution. Jesus upholds the moral standard. He doesn't condone the woman's sin, but he also refuses to participate in a system of judgment and punishment that dehumanizes both the accused and the accusers. Instead, he creates a space for reflection, repentance, and restoration. As news of this event spreads, we overhear various reactions that highlight the revolutionary nature of Jesus' approach. "But without punishment, how will we maintain order?" one man asks, his voice tinged with worry. "Perhaps true order comes not from fear of punishment, but from transformation of the heart," his companion replies thoughtfully. This exchange points to a fundamental shift in understanding that Jesus' teachings bring about. The love revolution isn't about abolishing all standards or ignoring wrongdoing. Rather, it's about approaching justice and social order from a radically different perspective, one that prioritizes restoration over retribution, healing over punishment. As we ponder these implications, we find ourselves drawn to the shores of the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus is teaching a large crowd. His words today focus on power and leadership, and they're no less revolutionary than his other teachings. "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them," Jesus says, his voice carrying across the attentive crowd. "Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." The crowd buzzes with confusion and excitement. This teaching turns the conventional understanding of power and leadership on its head. In a world where power was often equated with the ability to control and dominate others, Jesus is proposing a radically different model. As the crowd disperses, we overhear a group of young men excitedly discussing the implications of Jesus' words. "Imagine if our leaders actually lived like this," one says, his eyes shining with possibility. "If they saw their position as a responsibility to serve rather than a right to rule. But would such a leader be able to protect us from our enemies?" another asks, voicing the fears that many feel in an occupied land. "Perhaps," a third chimes in thoughtfully, "true strength lies not in the ability to dominate, but in the courage to serve and sacrifice for others." This conversation highlights the transformative potential of Jesus' teaching on leadership and power. He's not just suggesting a minor adjustment to the existing power structures, but proposing a complete inversion of the pyramid. In the kingdom of God, greatness is measured not by how many people serve you, but by how many people you serve. As we continue our journey, we come across a group of women discussing another aspect of Jesus' revolutionary approach, his treatment of women themselves. "Did you see how he spoke to the Samaritan woman at the well?" one woman asks, her voice filled with wonder. "He didn't just acknowledge her, he had a theological discussion with her. And remember how he defended Mary when she sat at his feet to learn, just like the male disciples," another adds. "He said she had chosen the better part, and it wouldn't be taken from her." These incidents, which might seem unremarkable to modern ears, were profoundly countercultural in Jesus' time. Women were often relegated to the margins of religious and public life, their voices silenced and their potential limited. By engaging women as full participants in his ministry, treating them with respect and dignity, Jesus was challenging deeply ingrained social norms and pointing towards a more equitable society. As night falls, we find ourselves back with the disciples, who are grappling with the implications of all they've seen and heard. Peter, always quick to speak, voices what many are thinking. "Master, these teachings, they're not just about personal morality, are they? You're talking about changing everything, the way we treat outsiders, how we handle conflict, even how we structure our society." Jesus nods, a gentle smile on his face. "You're beginning to understand, Peter. The kingdom of God isn't just about individual salvation, it's about a new way of being human, a new way of organizing society. It's about bringing heaven to earth." He pauses, letting his words sink in, then continues. "Think about the prayer I taught you, your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven." This is what that looks like in practice. It's about creating a society where love, justice, and mutual service are the norm, not the exception. As the disciples ponder these words, we're struck by the comprehensive nature of the revolution Jesus is initiating. It's not just about personal piety or individual morality. It's a complete reimagining of human society, based on the principles of love, service, and recognition of the inherent dignity of every person. This revolution challenges every aspect of the status quo. It confronts systems of exclusion and marginalization by embracing those society rejects. It subverts hierarchies of power by elevating service over domination. It transforms our approach to conflict and justice by prioritizing restoration over retribution. It redefines community, expanding our circle of concern beyond traditional boundaries of family, tribe, or nation. It elevates the status of the marginalized, including women and the poor, recognizing their full humanity and potential. As we reflect on these implications, we begin to understand why Jesus' message was so threatening to those in power. This wasn't just a new religious movement, it was a comprehensive challenge to the entire social order. Yet, paradoxically, this revolution isn't imposed by force or violence. It spreads through acts of love, service, and self-sacrifice. It's a revolution that begins in the human heart and radiates outward, transforming relationships, communities, and ultimately, entire societies. As dawn breaks, casting its golden light over the Galilean landscape, we're filled with a sense of awe at the scope of Jesus' vision. The love revolution he initiated on that hillside is far more than a set of ethical teachings, it's nothing less than a blueprint for a new humanity. But we also recognize the immense challenges that lie ahead. Living out this revolutionary love in a world often driven by fear, greed, and the quest for power is no easy task. It requires courage, perseverance, and a willingness to swim against the current of societal norms. As we prepare to continue our journey with Jesus and his disciples, we carry with us a deepened understanding of the radical nature of his message. We've seen how the revolution of love challenges not just individual hearts, but entire systems and structures. We've glimpsed the potential for a world transformed by this revolutionary love, a world where the last are first, where enemies are loved, where leadership means service, and where every person's dignity is recognized and upheld. Yet we also sense that the story is far from over. How will this message be received as Jesus and his followers move beyond Galilee? What opposition will they face from those whose power is threatened by this radical vision? And how will Jesus himself embody this revolutionary love in the face of growing conflict and danger? As the sun rises fully, bathing the landscape in warm light, we set out once again, following Jesus and his disciples as they continue their journey. The words of the Sermon on the Mount echo in our ears, but now we understand them not just as beautiful ideals, but as the manifesto of a love revolution that has the power to change the world. We move forward with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, knowing that the path ahead will be challenging, but filled with the hope of a new world dawning. As we continue our journey through the teachings of Jesus, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment. The air is thick with anticipation as we prepare to uncover the revolutionary phrase that would change the course of history and continue to challenge and inspire people for millennia to come. Picture yourself standing among the crowd on that Galilean hillside, the warm breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and the salt of the nearby sea. Jesus, his eyes scanning the diverse gathering before him, takes a deep breath and utters the words that would shake the foundations of human understanding. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. The crowd falls silent, the weight of these words settling over them like a heavy blanket. Some exchange confused glances, others furrow their brows in contemplation, and a few even scoff at what seems like an impossible command. This phrase, "love your enemies," is not just a nice sentiment or a lofty ideal. It's a radical call to action that challenges the very core of human nature and societal norms. To fully grasp its revolutionary impact, we need to understand it in its historical context and then trace its influence through the ages to our modern world. In first-century Judea, the concept of loving one's enemies would have seemed not just difficult, but absurd. The Jewish people were living under Roman occupation, their land controlled by a foreign power that often showed little regard for their customs and beliefs. The memory of past rebellions and their brutal suppression was still fresh. Many harbored deep resentment towards the Romans and those who collaborated with them. Moreover, the prevailing understanding of justice was based on the principle of an eye for an eye, a concept meant to limit retaliation but often interpreted as justification for revenge. The idea of actively loving one's enemies, of wishing good upon those who harm you, was revolutionary in its truest sense. Yet Jesus doesn't just throw out this challenging command and leave it at that. He goes on to explain. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. In these words, Jesus is calling his followers to a higher standard of love, one that reflects the very nature of God. He's challenging them to break the cycle of hatred and violence, to be agents of reconciliation in a fractured world. As we ponder the implications of this teaching, let's fast forward through history and see how this revolutionary idea has played out in various contexts. In the early centuries of Christianity, we see followers of Jesus taking this command seriously even in the face of severe persecution. Stories abound of Christians praying for their tormentors, of martyrs forgiving those who condemned them to death. This radical love puzzled and often impressed their Roman persecutors, contributing to the spread of the faith throughout the empire. Fast forward to the 20th century, and we see the power of this teaching embodied in figures like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Though Gandhi wasn't a Christian, he was deeply influenced by Jesus' teachings on nonviolence and love for enemies. His application of these principles in the struggle for Indian independence inspired millions and brought about significant social change without resorting to violence. King, drawing directly on Jesus' teachings, led the civil rights movement in the United States with a commitment to love even those who opposed him. In his famous "Love Your Enemies" sermon, King said, "To our most bitter opponents we say, we shall match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering. We shall meet your physical force with soul force. Do to us what you will, and we shall continue to love you." This approach, rooted in Jesus' revolutionary command, helped to bring about significant social and legal changes, challenging centuries of racial injustice. But what does it mean to love our enemies in the 21st century? How can we apply this radical teaching in our modern context? Let's consider a few scenarios. In the realm of politics, loving our enemies might mean refusing to demonize those who hold different views. It could involve actively listening to understand their perspectives, finding common ground where possible, and maintaining respect even in disagreement. Imagine how this approach could transform our often toxic political discourse. In the context of international relations, loving our enemies could mean seeking diplomatic solutions even with nations we consider adversaries. It might involve prioritizing humanitarian aid and cultural exchanges over military confrontation. The long-term peace between former enemies like France and Germany after World War II shows how this approach can transform relationships between nations. On a personal level, loving our enemies might mean choosing forgiveness over revenge when we're wronged. It could involve praying for the well-being of someone who has hurt us, or even taking active steps to help them if they're in need. While this doesn't mean staying in abusive situations, it does mean breaking the cycle of hatred and retaliation. In the business world, loving our enemies could mean treating competitors with respect, avoiding unethical practices even if they might give us an edge, and perhaps even collaborating for the greater good of the industry or community. In the context of social justice movements, loving our enemies means fighting against unjust systems and policies without dehumanizing the individuals who support or benefit from those systems. It means maintaining a vision of reconciliation even while working for necessary change. As we consider these applications, it's important to note that loving our enemies doesn't mean approving of their actions or ignoring injustice. Jesus' own life demonstrates that love can coexist with righteous anger and a passion for justice. The key is that our response to evil is driven by love, a desire for the redemption and transformation of the wrongdoer, rather than by hatred or a desire for revenge. This brings us to a crucial point. The power of Jesus' revolutionary phrase lies not just in its ethical implications, but in its potential to break cycles of violence and create space for genuine transformation. When we respond to hatred with love, to violence with non-violence, we change the dynamics of the situation. We create the possibility for our enemy to see us as fully human, potentially sparking a change of heart. Consider the story of Daryl Davis, a black musician who has spent years befriending members of the Ku Klux Klan. Through patient dialogue and genuine friendship, he has convinced numerous Klan members to leave the organization. His approach, which embodies Jesus' teaching about loving enemies, has accomplished what years of confrontation and argument could not. Or think about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in post-apartheid South Africa. Inspired in part by Christian principles of forgiveness and reconciliation, this process allowed victims of apartheid to tell their stories and perpetrators to confess their crimes. While not perfect, this approach helped the nation move forward without descending into a cycle of revenge and counter-revenge. These examples show that Jesus' command to love our enemies is not just a personal ethical teaching. It has the power to transform societies and resolve conflicts that seem intractable. However, it's important to acknowledge that this teaching is incredibly challenging. Our natural instinct when hurt or threatened is to lash out, to seek revenge, to protect ourselves by dehumanizing our opponents. Loving our enemies goes against these deeply ingrained responses. It requires a fundamental shift in how we see ourselves, others, and the nature of conflict. So how do we cultivate this capacity to love our enemies? Here are a few practical steps. Practice empathy. Try to understand the perspective of those you consider enemies. What experiences have shaped their views? What fears or needs might be driving their actions? Recognize shared humanity. Remind yourself that your enemy is a human being with hopes, fears, and struggles, just like you. This doesn't excuse harmful actions, but it can help prevent dehumanization. Start small. Begin by practicing love towards minor annoyances or opponents before tackling major conflicts. As you build this muscle, you'll be better equipped to face bigger challenges. Seek common ground. Even with those you strongly disagree with, try to find areas of shared concern or common values. This can be a starting point for dialogue and understanding. Practice forgiveness. This doesn't mean excusing harmful actions, but rather choosing to release resentment and the desire for revenge. Forgiveness is often a process, not a one-time event. Pray or wish well. If you're a person of faith, pray for your enemies. If not, simply wish for their well-being. This practice can gradually shift your attitude towards them. Respond to harmful actions, not people. When you need to oppose someone's actions, focus on the behavior rather than attacking the person. This leaves room for the possibility of change and reconciliation. As we conclude our exploration of Jesus' revolutionary phrase, "Love your enemies," we're left with a profound challenge. This teaching asks us to reimagine our understanding of love, justice, and human relationships. It calls us to a higher standard of behavior, one that has the potential to break cycles of violence and create space for genuine transformation. In a world often divided by hatred, fear, and misunderstanding, Jesus' words continue to offer a radical alternative. They challenge us to be agents of reconciliation, to see the humanity in those we might consider enemies, and to respond to evil with good. As we move forward from this hillside in ancient Galilee to our modern world, we carry with us this revolutionary idea. It's an idea that has inspired countless individuals to acts of extraordinary courage and compassion. It's an idea that has toppled oppressive regimes without firing a shot. And it's an idea that continues to offer hope for resolving conflicts that seem beyond solution. The phrase, "Love your enemies," is not just a beautiful ideal, it's a practical, powerful tool for personal and social transformation. As we face the challenges of our time, political polarization, racial injustice, international conflicts, environmental crises, this ancient teaching offers a radical and hopeful path forward. So, as we conclude this exploration, let's challenge ourselves to take this revolutionary idea seriously. How might our lives, our communities, our world be different if we truly embraced this radical love? What enemies in our own lives are we being called to love? And how might this love begin to transform the conflicts and divisions we see around us? The revolution of love that Jesus initiated continues to this day, inviting each of us to participate. As we step into this challenge, we become part of a movement that has the power to change not just individual hearts, but entire societies. We become carriers of a revolutionary love that has the potential to heal our fractured world. As our journey through Jesus' teachings reaches its pinnacle, we find ourselves back on that hill in Galilee, the place where it all began. The sun is setting, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, as we reflect on the magnitude of what we've witnessed. Jesus' words, especially his revolutionary phrase, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you," echo in our minds, challenging us to see the world in an entirely new way. But now, as twilight deepens, a question arises: how do these teachings, spoken 2,000 years ago, continue to shape our world today? What is the lasting legacy of this revolution of love initiated by a carpenter from Galilee? To answer these questions, we must first recognize the profound influence that Jesus' teachings have had in shaping Western civilization and, by extension, much of the modern world. From hospitals to legal systems, from educational institutions to human rights movements, the influence of Christian thought, grounded in Jesus' teachings, is undeniable. Consider, for example, the concept of universal human dignity. The idea that every human being, regardless of race, social status, or nationality, possesses inherent worth and inalienable rights has its roots in Jesus' teachings on universal love and equality before God. This concept forms the basis of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and continues to be an ideal we strive for in our global society. Or think about the impact of the ethic of forgiveness and reconciliation preached by Jesus. These principles have not only shaped countless individual lives but have also influenced social movements and national policies. The civil rights movement in the United States, led by Martin Luther King Jr., was deeply influenced by Jesus' nonviolent ethic. In South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, inspired by Christian principles, helped the nation transition from apartheid to democracy without falling into a cycle of revenge. However, it would be a mistake to think that the relevance of Jesus' teachings is confined to the past or limited to those who identify as Christians. In fact, in our increasingly polarized and fractured world, Jesus' words are more pertinent and challenging than ever. Consider the current geopolitical landscape. In a world marked by tensions between nations, ethnic and religious conflicts, and growing us versus them rhetoric, Jesus' call to love our enemies sounds like a radical challenge. Imagine how international relations could be transformed if nations truly sought the well-being of their enemies, if diplomacy were conducted with a spirit of love and mutual respect, even amid disagreements. Or think about how Jesus' commandment not to judge others could transform our social media culture, where quick judgments and public condemnations are the norm. In an age of cancellation and polarization, Jesus' call to examine our own faults first before pointing out those of others offers a path to more compassionate and constructive dialogue. Jesus' instruction to turn the other cheek also takes on new meanings in our modern context. Far from being a call to passivity, this is a powerful strategy of nonviolent resistance that continues to inspire activists and social reformers. In a world where violence often seems to be the default response to conflict, the path of nonviolence offers a powerful and transformative alternative. Moreover, Jesus' teachings about the nature of true success and happiness are deeply countercultural in our consumer-oriented society. In a culture that often equates personal worth with material wealth or social status, Jesus' words, "What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?" offer a radically different perspective on what really matters in life. However, it would be naive to suggest that applying Jesus' teachings in the modern world is simple or without controversy. In fact, many of the most divisive issues in our society today involve conflicting interpretations of these teachings. For instance, how should we balance Jesus' call to love and welcome the stranger with practical concerns about national security and limited resources? How can we apply his teachings about caring for the poor and marginalized in a complex global economic system? How do we reconcile his call for forgiveness with the need for justice and accountability? These are not easy questions, and people of goodwill often disagree on how Jesus' teachings should be applied to specific political and social issues. However, the very fact that we continue to wrestle with these questions is a testament to the ongoing relevance of his teachings. Furthermore, it's important to recognize that the impact of Jesus' teachings extends far beyond the religious or even ethical sphere. His parables and metaphors have deeply penetrated our cultural language and imagination. Phrases like, the Good Samaritan, going the extra mile, separating the wheat from the chaff, are regularly used, even by those who may not be aware of their origin. Jesus' influence also extends to the realm of art and literature. From the frescoes of the Sistine Chapel to the works of Dostoevsky, from African-American spirituals to the poetry of T.S. Eliot, the life and teachings of Jesus continue to inspire artistic creations that explore the depths of human experience. But perhaps the most profound and lasting impact of Jesus' teachings is the way they continue to transform individual lives. Around the world, people from all walks of life find hope, healing, and new purpose through these ancient teachings. Think of Immaculée Ilibagiza, a survivor of the Rwandan genocide. Hidden in a small bathroom for 91 days while killers searched for her, she clung to Jesus' teachings about forgiveness. After surviving the horror, she was able to forgive those who killed her family, breaking the cycle of revenge and dedicating her life to promoting healing and reconciliation. Or consider the work of organizations like Habitat for Humanity, which puts into practice Jesus' call to care for the poor by building homes for needy families around the world. Or the countless ordinary people who, inspired by Jesus' example, dedicate their lives to serving others, whether caring for the sick, feeding the hungry, or fighting for justice for the oppressed. These examples remind us that Jesus' teachings are not just a set of ethical rules or abstract principles. They are an invitation to a wholly new way of being in the world, a way characterized by radical love, boundless compassion, and a vision of human community that transcends all barriers. As we approach the end of our journey, it's important to recognize that Jesus' teachings continue to be as challenging and countercultural today as they were when first uttered on that Galilean hillside. In a world often dominated by fear, greed, and division, the call to love our enemies, forgive 70 times 7, and see the divine in the face of the least of these remains profoundly radical. However, it's also crucial to understand that these teachings are not a heavy burden, but an invitation to freedom and fullness. Jesus wasn't just setting up a new set of rules for his followers to comply with through willpower. Instead, he was pointing to a new reality, what he called the kingdom of God, and inviting people to live in that reality here and now. This kingdom is not a physical place, but a way of living in harmony with God's love and justice. It's a kingdom where the last are first, where the meek inherit the earth, where mercy triumphs over judgment. It's a kingdom that begins as a small seed planted in human hearts, but has the potential to transform the entire world. Living in this kingdom, embodying Jesus' teachings in our daily lives, is not easy. It requires a fundamental shift in our way of thinking and acting. It requires courage to love when it would be easier to hate, strength to forgive when revenge seems sweeter, humility to serve when the world tells us to seek power. But those who have taken up this challenge over the centuries testify that this path, however difficult, leads to a life of deep meaning, joy, and freedom. They have discovered that, paradoxically, it is in giving that we receive, in forgiving that we are forgiven, in dying to self that we find true life. So, as we conclude our exploration of Jesus' revolutionary teachings, we are left with an invitation and a challenge. The invitation is to experience for ourselves this radical way of living, to test the truth of these teachings in our own lives. The challenge is to imagine how our world could be transformed if more of us took seriously this call to radical love. Imagine a world where conflicts are resolved not through force or coercion, but through dialogue and mutual understanding. A world where nations compete not to dominate each other, but to see who can do more to uplift humanity as a whole. A world where success is measured not by the amount of wealth we accumulate, but by the depth of our love and the extent of our service to others. This is the world that Jesus envisioned when he spoke those revolutionary words 2,000 years ago. It's a world we have not yet fully realized, but one we glimpse in every act of selfless love, every gesture of forgiveness, every step towards reconciliation. As we leave that Galilean hillside and return to our lives in the 21st century, we carry with us not just Jesus' words, but the challenge to live them out. We are called to be not just hearers of these teachings, but doers, to be, in Jesus' own words, the salt of the earth and the light of the world. The sun has now fully set, and the first stars begin to twinkle in the night sky. But as the darkness deepens, we are reminded of Jesus' words, "You are the light of the world." In a world often marked by the darkness of hatred, fear, and division, we are called to be bearers of this revolutionary light of love. As we embark on this journey, we may feel inadequate to the task. The challenges we face, personally and collectively, may seem insurmountable. But we are encouraged by Jesus' words, "With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." And so, we leave this exploration not with a sense of conclusion, but with a sense of beginning. The teachings we've explored are not relics of a distant past, but seeds of a future yet to be born. A future we are invited to help create, one act of love at a time. As the stars shine more brightly above, we are reminded that the brightest light is not the one that shines from afar, but the one that shines from within, the light of divine love reflected in human lives. And so, inspired by Jesus' revolutionary teachings, we go forth to be that light in our world, confident that in doing so, we are participating in a revolution that began 2,000 years ago and continues to this day, the revolution of love. As we conclude this exploration of Jesus' revolutionary teachings and their enduring impact, we want to hear from you. How have these teachings influenced your life? What challenges do you face in applying them in today's world? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If you found this journey through Jesus' teachings inspiring and thought-provoking, we invite you to be part of our community. Subscribe to our channel to join us in exploring more of these timeless truths and their application in our modern world. By subscribing, you'll ensure you don't miss our upcoming videos that delve deeper into spiritual wisdom and its practical implications for our lives today. Remember, this journey of understanding and applying Jesus' teachings is one we're all on together. Your insights and experiences are valuable and can inspire others. So don't hesitate to engage, share, and be part of this ongoing conversation. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's continue this transformative journey together. Thank you for being part of this exploration, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video.